Welcome to the Exponential Edge podcast with your host, Arya Sulur. I'm excited to have you join me on this journey, exploring the forefront of technological advancements and innovation that will shape our future. As a junior at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School in Massachusetts and the CEO of SecArmor, a cybersecurity startup, I'm fascinated by the transformative power of technology. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into 5 key areas that are poised for exponential growth in the next decade. We'll be exploring the realms of cybersecurity, generative AI, sustainability and climate tech, biotech and human longevity, as well as the reshoring of manufacturing. And we'll also go over rising startups disrupting the marketplace. These topics and businesses hold immense potential to revolutionize our world and redefine the way we live, work, and interact. Each episode will feature insightful conversations with experts, thought leaders, and visionaries who are at the forefront of these fields. In just 30 minutes, our goal is to provide you with 5 signature nuggets of wisdom from our guests. These key takeaways will empower you with knowledge and help you stay ahead in an ever-evolving technological landscape. Without further ado, let's introduce our guest for this week. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Exponential Edge podcast. Today, our guest is Gagandeep Bhullar, CEO of SuperHumanRace. Hi, Gagan.
Hi, Arya.
How's it going today?
Very good. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So, just to start us off, do you think you could go over what SuperHumanRace is, just briefly?
Sure. So, SuperHumanRace is actually the world's most advanced AI platform to measure good. And what we define as good is everything from business sustainability, so the action that businesses are taking by making investments in a sustainable culture or a sustainable product. It is also community impact, or what we know as corporate social responsibility, or CSR. And it could even be, individual impact, which could be in the form of employee impact or citizen impact that is being promoted by either an employer or the government of a country. So SuperHumanRace measures good across all these dimensions. And the principle on which we work is that all data is collected directly from source. So it's the highest quality of data for good that exists anywhere in the world today. And it gets organized in analytics and contextual insights that are relevant in order to make good sustainable. So we are trying to power human kindness using data and technology.
Mm-hmm. And you use terms like corporate social responsibility. And for our younger audience, since we have a lot of kids in high school and in college as our viewers, do you think you could just define corporate social responsibility and ESG for those viewers?
Sure. So actually, when I'm trying to explain this to a younger audience, including my own son, who is just 2.5 years old, I usually sort of start with imagine a world where you could have unlimited candies, right? So nobody's stopping you. You can have any amount of candy that you like. Or if you're a teenager, imagine that you could just party every night, right? No limits. You're not getting grounded for doing anything wrong. So it feels great in the moment and it feels like you're getting everything that you want. But as we grow, we realize that this will not lead to a very bright future. It will in fact lead to a bleak future where you might be obese, you might have, sickness that you're suffering from, you may not have the best opportunity to get great jobs. And that's sort of what corporate social responsibility and ESG, which is environmental social governance parameters, are for companies, right? So when we allow them to do exactly what they want with the single motive of maximizing profitability, it puts the world we live in at risk. And that's sort of why this is important. What it actually means is that when you're thinking about business models, products, solutions, services, you need to be thinking about, as a business, about being net positive versus net negative as it relates with the communities and the planet that we are on, right? And today it is Earth, but tomorrow it could be 10 other planets. So if you're taking natural resources, consuming them responsibly, and then replenishing them is what the environmental parameters are all about. And then when we look at communities and people, having a diverse and fair culture and representation, giving back to the communities that we are taking things from, even in terms of soft opportunities in some cases, right? So let's say you're a mass producer of something that competes with local handicrafts. How do you also make sure that, those artisans are able to transition to sustainable livelihood despite
Yeah.
your also being a profitable company or business? So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's what ESG and CSR are all about. And it just, yeah, that's what we do.
Mhm. Thank you for that. And transitioning into your career a bit, you've studied at the Mumbai University of Engineering and have worked at industry giants like Boeing and then founded SuperHumanRace. So, what were the turning points of your career that led you to all these different spheres? And I believe you also taught calculus to underprivileged kids using music and rhythm
Yes.
when you just started out. So, could you go
Yeah.
into that a little bit too?
Sure. So, as you can see, I'm a very experimental person. And so, engineering was not my first choice in terms of the discipline that I wanted to opt for. I think that I'd always been good at like multiple disciplines, just like many youngsters today are. So, I was especially good at math, but also at language. And my first choice was to study language. And I think this is one of the points in my journey that I want to talk about because I know that a lot of the audience is going to be younger. It happens to be completely coincidental, but it was just the right choice at the time. My father actually told me when I was thinking about pursuing English honors as my chosen sort of vocation that this is something that you can read and study and sort of become better at even on your own, but you should opt for a subject where you would require, if you're actually going to be going to college, opt for something that requires teaching. And I'm so glad that he pushed me in that direction, because I think that especially for women and girls that are your age and thinking about what career to choose, I think it's especially important to make the choice of a STEM career, because then it increases your likelihood of being highly paid, getting to top positions, and so on, right? So it just sort of creates a better, more equal world when women choose STEM. And then from once I'd chosen STEM, so I was already enrolled in engineering. I had my first summer break during engineering, and in my college there was no requirement to sort of intern anywhere, but I decided to go talk to one of my mentors, and he was the owner of the largest coaching institute in Mumbai. His name is Mr. Ramchandar Nanda. He's now no more, unfortunately, but at the time we started thinking about this concept called mind yoga, and that became a precursor to superhuman race in many ways. So, what Mind Yoga was all about was that how do you instill fun and bring joy even if a situation is bleak? So, for example, for a child that is underprivileged or has mental health issues, learning may be challenging, right? Or if they even have dyslexia, right? And so, how do you sort of bring joy to those children? How do you, and music was one of the ways that we did it, but also, things like just being able to, do some kind of, little dribbles or, experiment with cartoons. So things like that, things that are really, really fun, and connecting with them with things that are not fun in the minds of those children. So that is where the calculus plus music happened. And you'll be surprised to know this, Arya, when I started with that class, and it was an experimental method that we were using, right? So those were not only underprivileged kids, they were usually at less than 30% score in math. And by the time we were
Wow.
done with them, many of them were getting a distinction in math, so more than 75%. And some of them still remember the rhyme that was associated with the 0 half 1 by root 2 root 3 by 2 and 1, which is the sine formula. Yeah. So it was really interesting. Yeah. And so from that point on, so I did a lot of this while I was studying engineering. So because I was sort of, we had this successful little pilot with math. We also worked with children with mental issues. And then, we also tried to work with MBA students. I was not a postgraduate myself, but I was taking some classes for them at the institute. And, it was really fun to sort of explore all of that. But what that told me was that, at least for my first job, I needed to choose a startup because, and so before Boeing happened, I was working at an aviation startup, because I feel that when you choose small companies or startups as your first job, and again, this is very relevant to a younger audience, is you end up learning so many skills, right? Because there are no boundaries. So, as an example of what happened at the startup was that I was, I think, 22 years when I joined them, and I did not know that you can't just write letters to the government about things that you're doing and ask them to support you because I was so young. So I just wrote like a bunch of letters to a bunch of people, and ministers called my office to talk to me. I got invited to ministry meetings, and I was just a 22-year-old.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and I got the opportunity to work with President APJ Abdul Kalam's scientific advisory team. He was one of the best presidents that India had.
Hmm.
So just that one decision to join a startup, it completely changed my life because
Yeah.
when as it when you join a Boeing or a large company as your first
Hmm.
job, there are so many processes that you sort of learn that structured way of working,
Yeah.
and you don't know that these rules can be broken. But when you start with a startup, there are no rules, so
Hmm.
everything's fair game.
Yeah. And
And
also,
then
you would
going,
be just one of many, many people there. You wouldn't get
yes,
any special personal
you're just a
attention.
cog in the machine, yeah. But it's a great machine to be part of. But is yeah, you can't like just go and do whatever you want to do. Yes. But then I was very fortunate to be at Boeing. So I was the youngest person to be hired at Boeing India, also in a business leadership role as a woman. So lots of firsts there. And what Boeing actually taught me was how to think about employees, right? So before I joined the Boeing company, because I was coming from a startup, I had no idea that companies could take such good care of their people. And, there was so much love in that culture. So yeah, so that sort of helped prepare for Superhuman Race also in some ways, because it showed us what a good employer looked like, and how innovation happens and how innovation should be measured. So I was also fortunate to make it to a program at Boeing where one person from the whole world is selected every year as the first from Asia to ever make it, male or female. And they put that person that is selected on tough assignments, sort of measuring what's going wrong, how it can be fixed. The report directly goes to the board of directors, and the issue is something that is very contextually relevant for the company at the time. So the first issue that I was working on was the 787 battery issue. The airplane had been grounded all over the world because of the battery issue, and I was put to review the airplane. It had less than 10% on time delivery. So yeah, so that was lots of great changes. From less than 10% in 6 months, the airplane was at more than 60% on time delivery, and then in about a year at more than 90% on time delivery. So yeah, being able to work on some of those projects and technologies was also really inspiring and fun, also from the perspective of measuring their performance and helping them improve it. And that's where the idea of Superhuman Race sort of became final, right? So it started with this concept of how do you make something that is important but not fun, right? So that's also what climate is. So when people talk about climate or social justice, it's a black and white picture with sad music, because children are dying, the world is coming to an end, we're not going to have water to drink, there's going to be wars. But when you suddenly bring superheroes in the mix, that entire narrative changes. So it puts power in the hands of every person who wants to make a change, because then you can aspire to be that superhero that is driving the change, right? And but what is important there is also what I learned at Boeing, which was how do you sort of measure what you're doing and sort of stay on track, because everybody likes to make all these big statements and huge commitments, but whether they follow through on it or not only becomes evident much later, right? So it's not just hindsight, it's much later when an analysis happens of whether it failed or it succeeded, and usually by then it's too late. So being able to derive real time insights using data was, yeah, so that's the journey that led to Superhuman Race. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think one of the most incredible things about Superhuman Race is that the venture was bootstrapped, and you
Yeah.
guys, I believe you didn't raise any money from investors. It was all you and your team at the
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
So could you talk about that, and also about how you guys reached over 150 plus projects across all continents worldwide?
Sure. So, actually, this is a great question. Another one that I think all youngsters, especially, should be, sort of listening the response to. So, I think that being bootstrapped was a big plus. Now that I see in hindsight that we were able to achieve all this, so there are a couple of things that I'll talk about here. And the first thing that I want to mention, and I want to be honest about it. So, people is not my strength. I don't have any people at Superhuman Race reporting to me. I'm a pure technology, data nerd, and always working with technology alongside all our teams. But my co founder had this vision that, we wanted to build a team with the right people. So, he used to often say that, we have this bus called Superhuman Race. Our job is to find the right people that have a seat on the bus and that are going to be driving the bus. Once we have those people on the bus, they're going to know where to take the bus. And that's exactly what happened. So he invested a lot of energy in finding great people. And one of our big strengths today is the people that we have on our team, right? They are extremely creative, but they are also the builders of the culture at Superhuman Race. So we don't have, an HR person. We don't have anyone who's sort of, building the culture. The team's building the culture every day. And it's a culture that is extremely high performing while also being extremely fun at the same time. And the second thing that sort of dovetails on the bootstrapped success that we've had is that a lot of your direction as a company gets determined by where the capital is coming from. So if it's coming from just the promoters, which would be me and my co-founders, it would be driven by our intent and our vision, which is great, but it's still limited because it's just 2 or 3 people at the most. If it's coming from investors, then there's obviously the intent and the direction that the founders want to take, but also what the investors want them to take. And usually there's a conflict, sometimes, especially in early days, because founders will want to build a detailed, strong product, and investors will want to maximize business as soon as they come on board. So there's a little bit of a tension that starts there, which is not a bad thing. But in our case, the second source of our capital was not VC money. It was, in fact, customer money. And that is a fantastic and beautiful thing. So I think it's one of the best things that happened to us. Because when your money comes, when your primary source of funding is, client money, you're exactly aligned in what you want to do. You're in that business because you've identified a problem that you desperately want to solve, and the client's paying you money because they want you to solve the problem. So there is no dissonance. And what that does is that when you have a great team and you have this situation where there's a perfect alignment of purpose and vision, you end up running like at an exponentially fast rate compared to pretty much everyone around you, because there's a clear purpose and everybody's aligned with that purpose. And that's what sort of helped us to get to the product being used in 31 countries around the world. It's offered in 100 plus languages today. And we have some of the largest brands in the world that we are happy to call as customers that are helping us build our product. Companies like JLL, Capgemini, Deloitte. Yeah, so many. Tata Group, Godrej Group, DCM Shriram. Yeah. So we are fortunate in that sense, I think. Yeah.
So you guys were able to maintain that efficiency because you were able to carry out your vision and do what you guys wanted to do.
Yes.
And only what you guys wanted to do.
Yes.
That's awesome. So with Superhuman Race already achieving this significant scale while being bootstrapped, what drove the decision to, I saw you reposted an article. You guys were part of the Indian School of Business Accelerator for CleanTech. So how did that decision align with your future vision for the company?
So it's great that you've picked up on this, because I think a lot of people will not realize that it's not perfectly sort of aligned with where we are at. But it was an important and strategic decision for us to apply. And then, obviously we were honored when we were selected to be part of the accelerator. Yeah. I think you've probably guessed by now that, we're a bunch of data nerds, technical problem solvers that are trying to solve this problem. And I will be honest in admitting that we are not the best commercial brains out there. So we were not looking to maximize profit or revenue, which is also, or, just the money that the company has, which is also why we never focused our energy on raising money. But we realized that now the stage that we are at, so now we are in rapid scale up mode where, customers are recommending us to their friends are all wanting to get on the platform. And that's obviously great. But the opportunity that we also see is that as data connects across different networks, right? So if all the suppliers of a customer are on the platform and all their customers are on the platform, the truth in the data becomes even more evident, right? So our goal now is to sort of scale as rapidly as we can, just to make sure that, we capture that network that needs to be there. So the data is as truthful as it can be. And we think that ISV is a great strategic partner for that at multiple dimensions, right? One is that I think that now we do need the business acumen, which, we need to develop to sort of succeed as a business. And it's harder to succeed when you become a scale up or a corporate than when you're a startup, I think, in some ways, because if the idea is strong enough and the tech is strong enough, it's going to take you from startup to scale up. But then, things will start crumbling like a house of cards, if you don't have your ducks in order. So that's one part of it. But also, maybe we do realize that we don't need it today. So even though we are bootstrapped, we are profitable today, but we may need access to capital, and being part of a network like ISB is not going to hurt us. So I think we wanted to sort of maximize both the learning as well as the access to capital that we sort of saw being addressed by a single opportunity. And that's the reason why we thought it was a great strategic fit for us to go for the program. And I'm happy we got selected. They only selected 17
Hmm.
startups, and we're the only data
Yeah.
company. So it's great. Yeah.
Hmm. And talking more about some of your credentials and accomplishments, you guys were recognized you were recognized in the Power 100, and you participated in the United Nations CEO Roundtable. And these are obviously major milestones. So, could you share a couple of moments and insights from these platforms that enriched your perspective as a leader?
Sure. So I think they were very different recognitions, and 2023 has been a great year for us. It started with on 17th Jan at the World Economic Forum in Davos, a CEO study was launched actually, which had me as one of the CEOs that was covered. 130 CEOs from around the world were covered. But these were mostly very CEOs of very large companies like Unilever, Verizon, SoftBank, Tata Steel, Tech Mahindra, and so on, right? So it was huge to get that opportunity at the beginning of the year itself, and then continue to build on it throughout the year. And I think that also with the United Nations headquarters and the meeting that happened, so it was an invitation only meeting, and there were CEOs from 35 countries, both from the public and private sector. And it was to discuss the future of work and how it relates with sustainability. So, very, very on point in terms of the work that we are doing. But I think the main sort of thing so there are two messages that I want to share with everyone about these recognitions, as well as what they're able to deliver in terms of insight or credibility. So the first one is that as we get the opportunity to interact with others that are like us, in some cases these are going to be CEOs of very large companies, in some cases they are not going to be from the private sector. But one of the things that became very clear to me was that the global economy influences companies even of different scales in very similar ways. So until you're sitting in your office and solving for your organization, one does feel overwhelmed and isolated at times, right? So you feel that, oh my god, attrition has gone up, and costs have gone up, and business has slowed down, and maybe this is us doing something wrong. But the moment you're in that room with people who've done this for a lot longer, or they're doing it for larger companies, and when they say that they are seeing the same issues, I think that it's very reassuring in some ways that you're not alone, and this is not something that is happening because you're doing something wrong, especially from my perspective, because I was a young person and a startup CEO, right? So that was one of the big sort of takeaways for me. And I decided, when I got some of these recognitions and opportunities, especially to be in person with that group, that it's okay to sort of have these conversations with people. It's okay to ask other people whether they are going through something like this, and sort of brainstorm with them in terms of what you can do better, or what's working for them, not working for them. The other thing was also that again, the fact that I'm a woman CEO, so it's been a big theme of my experience, right, in terms of even running a startup. So one of the big examples that I always tell people, especially young people, is that even though I had worked with President APJ Abdul Kalam scientific advisory team, had this stint at Boeing, which was glorious. When I first started SuperHumanRace, and the first customer that I was pitching to, the managing director of that company actually said in Hindi, so I'll just say it in Hindi and then I'll translate it in English because it's so much more fun in Hindi. He said, "Kya ye ladki kar payegi?" I'm representing a team here, right? It's not just this young girl who's sort of pitching a product. And I've shown them the product. They've seen it. They believe it is their best choice. Their board is saying this is a good choice for them. But his question was, "Kya ye ladki kar payegi?" Which, when translated to English, it means, can this girl do it, right? And it was frustrating for me, right? I was like, how much more validation do you need than actually seeing the product, your board thinking that it's a great idea, and so on, right? But getting some of these recognitions, it makes it easier over time, because your credibility is also a function of who else recognizes you to be competent, to have done something meaningful, to be considered a thought leader. And so I think from that point of view, even though in many cases, for startup founders and CEOs in particular, I think it's hard to make the choice to travel to a UN event when there's so much happening, right? So you start thinking about, oh my God, my Two of my clients have board meetings and I'm pitching to three other clients, and this is just going to delay everything and it's not going to get me anything. But making that decision to just become visible, on occasion is not such a bad thing, because the credibility does help, and then you don't have to explain to the MD of a large company that even though you're a girl, you can do
Mhm.
it.
And
So
I'm
yeah, so
really glad that you talked about this because I also read your article
yeah.
about this, about your experiences as being a woman in corporate and your hardships that you went through. And I also kind of relate to it a little bit as my grandmother uh, in the 80s and 90s in India, she worked in a factory managing over 150 people,
Oh
and they
wow,
built solar cells that were put in spaceships, satellites that are still in orbit today. So
fantastic.
not really much about environmental and climate, but uh, also about technology and about
Yes,
her perseverance as a woman leader, even back then, 40 years ago. So I'm glad you talked about that. It's
great,
really important.
fantastic. Your
Hmm.
grandmother must be a powerhouse to be able to do it 40 years ago. I cannot even imagine how tough that must be. Yeah.
Hmm. She
Great, you
she
have great
recently
genes.
passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but her
Sorry.
legacy lives on. Hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so going into the AI and analytics, more of the nitty gritty about superhuman race. Um, Artificial intelligence has obviously revolutionized many platforms, and there are many types of artificial intelligence, like uh, symbolic, computer vision, machine learning, and obviously generative AI as well. So, how has AI specifically impacted superhuman race's analytics? What type of AI do you guys specialize in, and what edge does it provide to the companies evaluating their CSR and ESG?
Fantastic question again, Arya. I must compliment you on the questions that you've come up with. This is a good
Thank you.
question. Yeah. So, in terms of AI, we do generative data and we use machine learning along with that. So, in terms also of the CSR and ESG space, just a little bit, there's huge amounts of data that are generated in both of these spaces, mainly because at the level of the individual, there are certain things. So, for example, if you look at the emissions of a company, they come from multiple sources. So, beyond just the scope 1 and 2 emissions, there would be scope 3 emissions which come from 15 categories. One of those categories is business travel or employee commuting. So if the company has 200,000 employees, there are 200,000 data sources, and each person's obviously commuting data or business travel data could be different, and so on, right? So there's just a huge amount of data that resides within the ESG and CSR space. In the CSR space, usually when companies talk about their beneficiaries, they would be talking about millions of people, and data at the granular level exists for these millions of people and then gets translated into like big impact numbers for these companies, right? So in both of the spaces, there's a lot of data that has existed since the beginning of business, but it has never been even managed, let alone being analyzed, and definitely never been contrasted and correlated with financial performance in any way. So what we're able to do is we're able to do a couple of things. One is that we've built a network model in terms of our platform. We don't have a license model. So what that does is that it incorporates machine learning across the network. So every single corporate partner or nonprofit that is on the platform is not just borrowing from the models, they are also contributing to the models. So that's what the machine learning does. What this translates for the layperson from the CSR domain that is working on the platform is that think about all the tribal knowledge that exists, right? Somebody has been in the field for 30 years and they know exactly how to sort of measure water conservation, for example. They know that, if they're doing a particular intervention, the loss rate is going to be X based on the amount of rainfall and so on, right? Now, they know this information, but the day that they retire, even their company is not going to have this knowledge as part of their knowledge base. So, what the platform with its ML model is able to do is it's able to capture this tribal knowledge and distribute it across the ecosystem in the form of suggestions and simulations that are available for people to run whenever they want to, pretty much. The AI part actually does generative data. So just like you have conversational generative AI which can talk to people and understand contextual conversation, we are able to do contextual data generation. So less than 10% of the data on the platform is actually collected. More than 90% is generated by our AI platform. And I think that is very powerful, because one of the things that we became aware of very quickly when we started working in the field was that even though these are such important topics, even in the largest companies, the teams that are working on CSR or ESG are usually very small. So there will be a small team of at the most 4 people working, across CSR and ESG. And it's obviously impossible for them to collect millions of data points from like hundreds of stakeholders or sometimes even thousands of stakeholders, right? So then the whole focus went on to how do we make it data light. So within technology, we've evolved two concepts: data frugality and data fluidity for our generative data. What frugality means is that only that data is collected which is available along with evidence directly from source. So if the data is not available, if it has to be calculated or if it can be generated, it's generated. So the minimum possible data set is collected, and it's collected directly from source. So even if we have to coordinate with thousands of data sources, that is what the system does, versus encumbering one person with thousands of data points that they need to provide, because then it leads to errors and there can be no assurance for the data. The second thing is data fluidity. So once that slim data set is collected, which is less than 10% of the total data that is sort of available on the platform, data fluidity makes sure that it goes and sits everywhere it needs to sit. So if some of the data, according to our models, detects a risk, it could be a climate risk or a social risk or a business risk, it'll flag it to the respective stakeholder within the organization, which could be the board, the CEO, a zonal head, an HR person, whatever level it needs to happen at. So it's contextually organizing analytics, insights, reports, pulling from that slim data set. And it's also able to generate disclosures for national and international compliance based on that slim data set. So what that essentially means is that for, basically less than a tenth of your time commitment for data collection, you're able to get not just 100% of your data, but also all the disclosures, which is like another separate time commitment. And you're able to drive action using the data, because the system's also sort of constantly learning and recommending things to clients and partners.
Yep. Thank you for explaining this at a higher level. And
Sure.
you guys definitely are a trailblazer in this niche that you created for yourselves. And you've been instrumental in CSR and ESG initiatives. So do you think towards the end of this podcast, as we reach the end, you could just provide some examples, some stories that you've had to impact people with SuperHumanRace?
Yeah, I think there are so many stories that we can talk about, but I'll talk about three that cover each of the three sort of types of good that we measure on the platform. So, on the business sustainability side, we've actually seen that very quickly after beginning to use the platform, our customers will start making better choices in terms of materials in particular, right? So, if we think about any product, it could be a bar of soap or it could be an airplane. A lot of the emissions reside in the materials that sort of are used for creating that product and where those materials are coming from, right? And so the platform is able to provide such clarity to them in terms of the distance these materials are traveling, the processes that they are going through, and the actual emissions that resides in each of these material sets based on their consumption as well as the nature of the material. Then in many cases, our clients will move towards materials that will cost them less as well as reduce their emissions. So the platform is able to do both financial as well as climate or social impact contextualization for them to see, so that they can make better choices, not just for their business, but also for the planet or for the communities that they are in. So that is something that we've seen happen a lot of times. We've seen that they will actually make those choices. They will fix their procurement criteria to be aligned with their ESG criteria, because they know that there's money on the table to be taken, towards profit once they do it. And this is all based on data. It's not based on, some sage promising something under a tree, right? So yeah, we've seen that delivered impact. On the CSR side, I think early days, a lot of our clients, they were struggling with the fact that, many of them are working in the same locations because that location has specific needs. They are all trying to address the same needs, but they would always be concerned about the fact that, there could be double dipping, and maybe the impact that they are creating is not, like at the level of the individual, and maybe, there's corruption in the system and so on, right? So the platform sort of helps bring confidence in terms of even the impact that you're creating under community initiatives. So we've used the AI to detect duplicate beneficiaries getting benefits across multiple projects get flagged, and some of those things happen. And that's not necessarily in the format of a risk. Sometimes it's an opportunity, right? So you're able to see that somebody that you had supported as an organization, let's say there's a little girl in a village called X, and you've supported her as an organization for her primary school education, and then you see that a competing organization has actually paid for her secondary school education, and one of your customers is the source, her employer now. So imagine, you're able to see the full scale of impact delivered to that little girl in the village X based on what companies are able to do together. So I think that that is very reassuring and powerful, right, in terms of being able to communicate case stories of impact using data, not just anecdotal evidence across the value chain. Also, in some initiatives like high risk pregnancy detection, the platform is able to predict which women are at the highest risk, and what is the advisory that should be given to them, which are the strategies that have worked best. And so
Wow.
in countries like India and the global south, I think this is especially powerful because it has the potential to reduce maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and some of those again are part of like our set of delivered impact through the platform solutions. And the last one, which I think is very close to my heart, is the individual impact, right? So we have a solution which usually corporates will take, but also the government of India has used it under the largest citizen campaign that has ever been run in the country, actually, where individuals are able to measure the impact of what they are doing in the form of carbon footprint avoided or goodwill score that they are creating. And what we found is that the desire to do good is so strong in the human person, whether it is male or female, is that once they discover that sustainable lifestyle choices, will have a lower carbon footprint and so on, right? They start making those choices even if nobody's incentivizing it. So, sometimes I'll just go to what we call as the live feed of SuperHumanRace, where we can see what everybody is doing, and everybody can see this. It's a transparent feed that is available on the platform. And I'm surprised to see that people are making the choice to not buy physical newspapers. They are making the choice to read their news digitally. They are making the choice to cook at home instead of order from outside, because they know that there are emissions associated with that. They're making the choice to skip a shower or reduce the amount of time that they spent in the shower. So I think it's just fun. It's just fun to see that people are actually willing to do what it takes, and it makes a difference.
hmm And that's awesome that your your platform has so many diverse applications and can impact people on so many different levels. And finally, as we end this podcast, do you think for our listeners, whether it be entrepreneurs, students, investors, what would be your top 5 key insights or recommendations surrounding ESG and CSR?
Top five. Five is a lot, but I'll try. So, one is that I think the future of the world that we live in will see every job as a conscious and responsible job. So, I think today we have like a sustainability team that is doing sustainability. But I think, especially for founders, entrepreneurs, investors, companies, and even students, it's important to keep in mind that every job is going to have that layer of sustainability. You could be in HR, finance, procurement, anywhere, but you'll see that you would have to make your job a conscious and responsible job that aligns with ESG criteria. The second, I think, insight that I want to sort of share that I've learned is that it's important to measure the impact of whatever we do diligently, continuously, and honestly. And this I've actually learned vicariously through the experience of working with our clients, and how they've measured their impact in the past and the options that were available in the past. So until technology evolved, you could only measure impact at a point in time, just like remember how bad the schooling system is, because it measures your performance at a point in time. Like if on the day of the exam you're not feeling your best but you're the brightest person in the class, that point in time determines what's going to happen next with you. And that's such a pathetic system to have, right? And that's how impact also used to be measured. So I think that now that technology is available that can deliver continuous measurement of impact, it's important to do it, especially because also of the time that we are in. The climate crisis is deepening. We are seeing social conflict in many parts of the world. And so it's extremely important that we avoid the risk associated with both the climate crisis and the social crisis that we are seeing evolve around the world. And one of the ways to do that is to measure diligently, continuously, and honestly. And then the third, and this one's sort of important to me at a very personal level, is that I think that when companies start on their CSR or ESG journey, they sometimes don't remember that it's important to not only make investments in sustainability, but to make them very thoughtfully, right? So if I produce, let's say, buildings, right? Or I'm a company that does like aggregation of restaurants to make deliveries. I should be aligning my investments in sustainability with that. So, as a restaurant aggregator that is making deliveries, if I'm not investing in making EVs more sustainable and adopting EVs in my fleet, I'm not making a thoughtful or responsible investment in sustainability. Similarly, if I'm making buildings and they still continue to be, with highly emitting materials, I have lots of glass and I'm creating, greenhouses in the tropics, then I'm not doing justice to my role as a business, and I'm also not creating a competitive differentiator for me in any way, right? Because glass, so the greenhouse example in the tropics is a particularly relevant one because glass is also a highly emitting material. So if I'm not investing in sustainable glass, if I still want to continue doing this, and like temperature regulation despite the glass and so on, then it's not a thoughtful investment. So I think people people start people need to start seeing ESG and CSR as strategic differentiators for their business rather than an afterthought where, let's just spend it on an opportunity that seems flashy right now and we'll think about it later. So I think that's sort of another one that I think is very important to keep in mind. And then being transparent. So I think when we talk about transparency, usually for companies, it's an opportunity to talk about all the things that they've achieved. That is how transparency is perceived. But I think that transparency can be so powerful when we are asking tough questions, right? Despite being in that business. So the day that SuperHumanRace starts asking, is it really worthwhile to have data for good, and are we doing this right, or does something better need to be, is there something better that we can do? I think that is the day when we become even more transparent than we've been while we are just disclosing the performance of the company in the form of highlights. So one is sort of asking hard questions, and the second associated thing is sharing failures and what we've learned from them. Because if we don't do that, then everybody is going to have the same failure, or there's a high chance that everybody is going to experience that failure at some point in time, and we haven't really contributed to the knowledge pool of the world, right? And then the last thing, and this is absolutely the last thing that I will say, I believe very, very strongly in this again, is that I think we need to start demanding a radical frugality in business models. This is something that I talk about with a lot of people. I've spoken about this with a lot of people, and I think that there isn't a deep enough appreciation in investors as well as in companies and businesses and innovators of how important frugality is today. And business models that I'm seeing, so they are saying that this is a bad choice, so this plastic is a bad choice, so I'm just going to go and make the same amount of jars, but they are going to be glass jars. But if you're not able to reduce demand, if consumption and production don't reduce, we will still see very high emissions, right? So how do we sort of bring some radical change in business models where we are reducing consumption but we are still keeping the economy strong, is what we all need to start thinking about. So a great example of this is we did an article a few months ago on the F1 races, and F1 is another sort of like fun thing to sort of do an article on. And what we were looking at was whether sustainable fuel had been successful with F1 races. You'll be surprised to know that supercars are able to run on biodiesel without requiring any retrofit whatsoever, right? And if it's good enough for a supercar, it should be good enough for your car, but it's not mainstream. And, there's obviously a cost on the land use and all of that. So that needs to be rationalized. But, just imagine, rather than saying that it's a 10-year-old car, now we need to dump it for a material that can live on forever, right? Like a car can easily live for 50 years if we are able to retrofit it with the right source of energy. I think those are the business models that need both investment and innovators to sort of focus on. And I think that this is going to be an important piece, because some of the businesses that are successful today and are setting their targets for net zero but are not innovating around business models for frugality, they will not be in business, by the time they reach their target year for net zero. I'm certain of that. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Those were some great insights. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of the Exponential Edge podcast. And tune in next time to learn about businesses and trends that will see exponential adoption in the future. Thank you, Gagan.
Thanks, Arya. It was fun to be here.
Of course. Fun to have you. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks. Bye bye.